Imagine a tranquil afternoon, 15 years after a mystery seemingly swallowed two souls whole. Two fishermen, casting their lines into the serene depths of a remote mountain lake, felt an unusual resistance. It wasn't the thrashing of a trophy catch, but something far more sinister, something that would tear open a wound long thought scarred over. As they reeled in their unexpected find, a rusted, waterlogged box slowly emerged from the cold, dark water. This was not a treasure chest, but a grim, metallic container, heavily secured with chains and padlocks, its surface encrusted with years of sediment and algae. The air, once filled with the peaceful sounds of nature, now crackled with an unspoken tension. The fishermen, initially curious, soon felt a chill creep down their spines as the box's true nature began to dawn on them. This was no ordinary refuse. Its weight and the deliberate way it had been secured suggested a dark secret. They wrestled it into their small boat, the metallic clatter echoing across the still water. What horrors, they wondered, might lie within? The question hung heavy in the air, a silent prelude to the storm that was about to break. It was August 12th, 2008, when Monica and David vanished into the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Canadian Rockies. A young couple, full of life, brimming with the kind of optimism that only newlyweds possess, they set out for what they envisioned as a romantic, invigorating hiking trip. They were experienced outdoors enthusiasts, well-versed in the challenges of the wilderness, their backpacks meticulously packed with essentials, their route carefully planned. Their last known contact was a cheerful phone call to Monica's sister, a brief, reassuring message from a remote campsite, promising to call again upon their return. Then silence, a silence that stretched for days, then weeks, then years, growing heavier with each passing season. The initial alarm was raised by Monica's sister when the promised call never came. Days turned into a frantic search, a massive operation involving park rangers, local law enforcement, and a legion of volunteers. Helicopters crisscrossed the towering peaks, their rotors beating a mournful rhythm against the backdrop of the majestic, yet indifferent, landscape. Ground teams scoured treacherous ravines and dense forests, their hopes dwindling with every fruitless step. Posters bearing the smiling faces of Monica and David were plastered across every town, every ranger station, every diner within a 100-mile radius. Yet the Rockies, in their ancient, formidable silence, offered no answers. The vastness of the wilderness seemed to swallow every trace, every scent, every whisper of their passing. The initial theories were as varied as they were heartbreaking. A sudden rock slide, a brutal animal attack, a tragic misstep leading to a fatal fall. All were considered, all were plausible in such an unforgiving environment. But as days bled into weeks and weeks into months, a chilling realization began to set in. There was no sign, no struggle, no evidence of any kind of accident. It was as if Monica and David had simply evaporated, leaving behind only the ghost of their memory and a profound sense of bewilderment. Their families were left in an agonizing limbo, clinging to fragments of hope while battling the creeping tendrils of despair. The passage of time, while dulling the immediacy of the pain, only deepened the mystery, turning a tragic disappearance into an enduring enigma that haunted the quiet towns nestled at the foot of the mountains. Their story became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires, a stark reminder of nature's awesome power and humanity's fragile existence within it. The case, officially designated a missing persons file, slowly gathered dust on a shelf, occasionally revisited by a dedicated detective or a curious journalist, but ultimately remaining unsolved, a cold, unyielding truth in the heart of the Canadian wilderness. 15 years had passed, and the mystery of Monica and David's disappearance had settled into the collective memory as one of those tragic tales without resolution. The case had long been considered closed, filed away as an unfortunate encounter with the raw, untamed power of the Canadian Rockies. Hope had withered and died for all but the most tenacious members of their families, who still harbored a faint, almost defiant belief that answers might one day surface. But the wilderness, as it so often does, held its secrets close, guarding them with an impenetrable silence that had defeated every search party, every forensic effort. The rusted box, now brought to shore, sat on the small dock, an unassuming artifact that held the potential to shatter years of quiet grief and replace it with a new, terrifying reality. The fishermen, their hands still trembling, had immediately contacted the local authorities. The remote location meant a slow response, but eventually a small team of investigators arrived, their faces grim, their movements precise. They approached the box with a mixture of professional curiosity and palpable apprehension. The chains were formidable, clearly designed to keep its contents submerged and hidden forever. The padlocks, corroded by years of water, were a testament to the deliberate intent behind its concealment. After careful documentation, the box was transported to a secure facility, its secrets still tightly bound. The air in the makeshift evidence room was heavy with anticipation as a specialized team began the arduous process of opening it. Cutting through the rusted chains, slowly, deliberately, each clang of metal on metal echoed in the quiet room, heightening the tension. When the final padlock snapped open, a collective breath was held. The lid was pried open, slowly, revealing not the expected treasure, nor merely rocks, but something far more disturbing. Inside, nestled among layers of silt and decaying fabric, were personal effects. A woman's pendant, intricately carved and instantly recognizable from missing person reports. A man's watch, its hands frozen at a specific, unsettling time, and fragments of clothing. But then, as the forensic team meticulously sifted through the grim contents, a more horrifying discovery was made. The human remains, skeletal fragments almost indistinguishable from the lakebed sediment, confirmed the worst fears. Two distinct sets of remains, meticulously labeled and carefully removed, brought a chilling certainty to the years of uncertainty. The preliminary analysis, though challenging given the degradation, indicated something deeply unsettling. The manner in which the remains were found, fragmented and deliberately concealed within a weighted container, immediately dismissed any lingering notions of an accidental disappearance. This was no tragic misstep, no animal attack, no sudden avalanche. This was a crime scene, deliberately orchestrated and chillingly executed. The revelation sent shockwaves through the small community and rekindled the embers of a forgotten cold case. The case that had been filed away as an unsolved mystery of the wilderness now re-emerged as a full-blown murder investigation, igniting a fervent desire for justice. The discovery of the box changed everything, transforming a narrative of loss into one of calculated malice. The silent mountains, once seen as simply vast and beautiful, now loomed as a silent witness to an unspeakable act, their beauty now tinged with a profound sense of dread. The serene lake, once a place of leisure, had guarded a terrible truth for a decade and a half, only to finally yield its gruesome secret. The questions that had plagued families and investigators for so long resurfaced with renewed urgency. Who had done this, and why? The discovery of the box and its grim contents immediately launched a renewed, fervent investigation. The small police force, once resigned to the cold case, now felt a surge of renewed purpose, though tinged with the sobering weight of the task ahead. Detective Reynolds, a seasoned officer who remembered the original missing persons report, took charge. His face, etched with years of battling human darkness, showed a grim determination. The first step was painstaking forensic analysis of every single item recovered from the box. The waterlogged watch, though corroded, underwent careful restoration. Its hands, frozen precisely at 3:17, offered a potential timestamp for their last moments, a chilling detail that spoke volumes without a single word. The pendant, a gift from David to Monica on their wedding day, became a poignant symbol, its presence solidifying the identities of the victims beyond a shadow of a doubt. The fragments of clothing, meticulously pieced together, revealed tears and abrasions that were not consistent with a simple accident. The skeletal remains themselves, though heavily degraded, offered crucial clues. A forensic anthropologist was brought in, painstakingly examining each bone. The initial findings were disturbing. Evidence of blunt force trauma was detected on Monica's skull, suggesting a violent struggle. David's bones showed signs consistent with multiple stab wounds, a brutal end to what was meant to be a joyous journey. But perhaps the most profound revelation came from a seemingly insignificant detail: the absence of certain bones. Ribs and smaller vertebral fragments were missing, a detail that initially perplexed the investigators. This wasn't typical for accidental drowning or animal scavenging within a contained space. The medical examiner, after careful consultation with the anthropologist, proposed a grim hypothesis. The bodies had been dismembered before being placed in the box. This shocking twist transformed the case from a potential double murder into something far more premeditated and horrifying. The sheer brutality and methodical nature of the dismemberment painted a picture of a killer who was not only ruthless, but also disturbingly meticulous, driven by a desire to erase every trace of their crime. The dismemberment explained the deliberate effort to sink the box, the heavy chains, the padlocks. The killer wasn't just disposing of bodies. They were attempting to obliterate identities, to ensure the victims would never be found, never be identified. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a crime of passion committed in the heat of the moment. This was calculated, cold-blooded murder. The focus of the investigation immediately shifted. The vast wilderness, once seen as the culprit, was now merely the silent backdrop to a human horror. Who would go to such extreme lengths? What motive could drive such a heinous act? The initial theories of accident were not just dismissed. They were pulverized by the undeniable evidence of deliberate, sustained violence. The families, already reeling from the confirmation of their loved ones' deaths, were now plunged into a new abyss of anguish, grappling with the unthinkable reality that Monica and David had not just died, but had been subjected to such unspeakable savagery. The quiet suffering of 15 years was replaced by a roaring demand for justice, a desperate plea for answers that would finally unmask the monster who had committed this unspeakable act. The rusted box, once a symbol of hope for closure, now stood as a grim testament to the depths of human depravity, its contents screaming a silent tale of terror and betrayal. With the horrifying truth of dismemberment established, the investigation pivoted sharply. This was no longer just about identifying a killer. It was about understanding the meticulous planning and the chilling motive behind such a brutal act. Detective Reynolds and his team revisited every piece of information from the original missing persons file, scrutinizing it with fresh eyes, searching for any detail that might have been overlooked, any thread that could lead them to a perpetrator capable of such cold calculation. The first priority was to reconstruct the couple's last known movements with meticulous precision. Their planned hiking route, their last campsite, even the contents of their backpacks, which had never been found, all became critical points of inquiry. The fragmented clothing from the box was examined again, not just for damage, but for any trace of foreign fibers, soil, or even botanical matter that could pinpoint the precise location of the crime or the method of disposal. The time of death, though difficult to ascertain with absolute certainty after 15 years, was estimated using the watch and the degradation of the remains, narrowing down the window of their disappearance to a matter of days after their last contact. This suggested they met their end shortly after beginning their hike, not weeks later. The meticulousness of the crime, the dismemberment, the weighted box, the deep lake burial, all pointed to a killer who understood forensics, who had access to tools, and who possessed an unnerving level of composure. This wasn't an impulsive act. This was planned, executed with a singular, chilling purpose: to ensure that Monica and David would disappear without a trace, that their story would remain forever untold. The absence of the backpacks was particularly vexing. If the killer had taken the time to dismember and package the bodies, surely they would have also disposed of the backpacks, perhaps in a different location to further obscure the connection. Could this be a clue to the killer's geographical familiarity, or even a hidden message? The investigators broadened their search area, focusing on potential secondary disposal sites. The profile of such a killer began to emerge. Someone with intimate knowledge of the remote terrain, perhaps a local, or someone who frequented the area regularly. Someone strong enough to carry the heavy box to the lake and sink it. Someone with a deep-seated reason to silence Monica and David permanently. The motive, however, remained shrouded in shadow. Was it a random encounter gone horribly wrong? Unlikely, given the meticulous cover-up. Was it a personal vendetta? A business dispute? A love triangle? Every potential connection the couple had, every acquaintance, every minor disagreement was re-examined. Friends, family, former colleagues, everyone was re-interviewed, their alibis scrutinized with renewed skepticism. The fear that gripped the small community was palpable. For 15 years, they had lived with the vague unease of an unsolved mystery. Now, they knew a remorseless killer had walked among them, perhaps for years, carrying the horrific secret of Monica and David's fate. The silence of the Rockies, once just a natural phenomenon, now felt menacing, complicit. The tranquil lake, once a symbol of peace, became a watery grave, its depths holding not just the bodies, but the unspeakable evil of a calculated murder. The investigators felt the immense pressure of expectation, not just from the families, but from an entire community desperate for answers and closure. The weight of 15 years of unanswered questions pressed down on them, but also fueled their resolve. They knew that somewhere, out there, was a person who had committed an act of unimaginable cruelty, and they would not rest until that person was brought to justice. The relentless pursuit of justice led investigators down many dark paths, each one more unsettling than the last. As the forensic analysis continued, a small, almost imperceptible detail emerged from the depths of Monica's recovered clothing: a single, rusted arrowhead. It was unlike anything typically found in the region, its design peculiar, ancient, and distinctly non-local. This tiny artifact, barely larger than a thumbnail, suddenly became a monumental clue, a potential game-changer that threatened to unravel the entire 15-year-old narrative. Where did it come from? Was it merely an accidental inclusion, or did it hold a far more sinister meaning? Detective Reynolds, a man of methodical patience, sent the arrowhead to specialists. Their findings were astonishing. The arrowhead was identified as a rare artifact, consistent with those used by a small, isolated indigenous tribe known to have inhabited a specific, extremely remote corner of the Rockies centuries ago. This wasn't merely a historical curiosity. It pointed directly to a geographical location so isolated that it was rarely, if ever, visited by casual hikers. The implications were chilling. For Monica and David to have encountered such an artifact, they must have ventured far beyond their planned route, deep into a wilderness that few dared to tread. Why? What could have drawn them to such an inaccessible, almost forgotten place? The discovery forced a radical reevaluation of the entire case. The original assumption was that Monica and David had disappeared along their well-documented trail. Now, it seemed their final moments unfolded in a hidden, desolate corner of the mountains, a place only known to a select few. The shift in focus was immediate and profound. The investigation turned its gaze from a random encounter to a more targeted, deliberate interaction in an extraordinarily secluded area. Could they have stumbled upon something they shouldn't have seen? Were they lured there? The narrative of a simple hiking trip now morphed into something far more intricate and sinister, entwined with the deep, untamed heart of the wilderness itself. The arrowhead, small and innocuous, became a beacon, guiding the investigators to a potential crime scene far more remote and untouched than they had ever imagined. The team initiated a massive new search, but this time their efforts were concentrated on the specific, almost mythical area hinted at by the arrowhead. Helicopters, once again, took to the skies, but their focus was now narrower, more defined. Ground teams, led by experienced indigenous trackers, navigated treacherous terrain, their eyes scanning for any disturbance, any sign of human activity in an area that had remained undisturbed for centuries. The families of Monica and David, initially uplifted by the progress, were now plunged into a new kind of dread. The thought that their loved ones had not only been murdered, but had been led to such a desolate, forgotten place, added another layer of calculated cruelty to their already immense suffering. The notion of Monica and David straying so far from their planned path, against their established habits as seasoned hikers, was deeply unsettling. It suggested manipulation, coercion, or a hidden agenda that only the killer could explain. The silence of the wilderness, once a symbol of peace, now echoed with the haunting question of what untold horrors transpired in that remote, ancient corner of the world. The rusted box, pulled from the lake, had given up its most gruesome secrets, but had also birthed a new, more profound mystery, shifting the narrative from a simple murder to a complex web of deceit and a journey into the heart of a forgotten, perhaps forbidden, landscape. The arrowhead, a silent witness from a distant past, now pointed towards a truth far more disturbing than anyone had ever anticipated. The trail left by the ancient arrowhead ultimately led investigators to a place known only as the Whispering Peaks, an area so remote and forbidding that it existed more in legend than on any modern map. Guided by indigenous elders who possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of the land, the search team ventured into a wilderness that seemed to actively resist human presence. Days of arduous trekking through dense forest and over treacherous ridges finally brought them to a small, almost imperceptible clearing, nestled within a valley shrouded in perpetual mist. It was here, amidst a scattered pattern of ancient, weather-beaten stones, that they made their next chilling discovery. Partially buried beneath a layer of moss and fallen leaves, almost perfectly camouflaged by nature, was a rusted, archaic-looking amateur radio antenna. It was crudely fashioned, certainly not professional grade, but undeniably a communication device. Its placement in such a desolate locale was immediately suspicious, hinting at a covert operation, a clandestine outpost in the heart of the wild. But the radio antenna was just the beginning. Further excavation around the site unearthed more disturbing items. A tarnished metal box, similar in construction to the one recovered from a lake, but smaller, containing rudimentary survival gear, faded maps with hand-drawn annotations marking obscure trails, and a collection of personal effects, including a tattered, waterproof journal. The journal, though water-stained and fragile, contained fragmented entries that began to paint a terrifying picture. They were written by an unknown hand, detailing a fervent obsession with an ancient, lost treasure believed to be hidden deep within the Whispering Peaks. The entries spoke of cryptic clues, dangerous encounters, and a growing paranoia about outsiders. The author, clearly unhinged, described the wilderness not just as a place of beauty, but as a guardian of sacred secrets, accessible only to the chosen few. This was not the work of a casual hiker. This was the lair of a fanatic, a recluse driven by a singular, dangerous obsession. The chilling implication was undeniable. Monica and David had not stumbled upon a treasure, but upon the treasure hunter himself, a disturbed individual who perceived them as a threat to his solitary quest. The journal entries grew darker towards the end, filled with feverish pronouncements about intruders, about protecting the ancient spirits, about eliminating those who dared to profane the sacred ground. The team, now certain they had found the killer's hideout, worked with an almost frantic energy, meticulously documenting every piece of evidence. The presence of the antenna suggested a level of preparedness, a means of communication or perhaps surveillance, even in this remote location. Why would someone need a radio in such isolation unless they were expecting something or someone? The small metal box with survival gear further solidified the image of a long-term inhabitant, someone who had made this desolate clearing their home, their sanctuary, their hunting ground. The realization that Monica and David had likely stumbled upon this disturbed individual, perhaps witnessing something they shouldn't have, or simply being perceived as a threat to his twisted quest, was a heavy blow. Their dream of a romantic wilderness adventure had collided with a nightmare of ancient obsessions and modern paranoia. The ancient stones, which had once seemed like mere geological formations, now loomed as silent sentinels, witnesses to a clandestine existence and a tragic encounter. The final pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, revealing a story far more complex and horrifying than anyone could have imagined. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was the grim culmination of a hermit's descent into madness, triggered by the perceived encroachment of two innocent souls into his self-proclaimed dominion. The fate of Monica and David, once shrouded in mystery, was now tragically clear. They had become collateral damage in a deranged man's desperate and deadly pursuit of a phantom treasure. The Whispering Peaks had finally given up their secret, a story of an ancient arrowhead, a clandestine radio, and the terrifying obsession that claimed two lives.